Being a NASCAR fan is one of the most exciting and unpredictable experiences in all of sports. You never really know what is going to happen from one moment to the next. One minute, everything looks perfect, your favorite driver is running strong, the car is fast, the team is doing everything right, and then, out of nowhere, something tiny, something almost invisible, completely flips the entire story of a race. That is what makes this sport so addictive. That is what keeps fans coming back every single week, because you genuinely never know what you are going to see. This week, there are two stories that show exactly what NASCAR is all about. Both of them involve big names, both of them have real consequences, and both of them are the kind of stories that remind you why this sport is different from everything else out there. The first story is about a moment during a race that was decided by a margin so small that most people had to read it twice just to believe it. The second story is about a driver who might actually miss an upcoming Cup Series race, not because of anything that happened on the track, but because of something happening in his personal life. His team is already thinking ahead and has multiple backup plans ready to go, just in case things happen at the worst possible moment. Before we get into all of that, if you are a real NASCAR fan who follows the sport every single week and loves talking about what is actually happening in racing, go ahead and hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. This channel is brand new, and the goal here is simple. It's a place where real NASCAR fans can have honest conversations about the sport the way we actually talk about it, without all the fluff and without sugarcoating anything. We are trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you helps make that happen. So if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe and come back every week, because there is always something new happening in NASCAR worth talking about. Now let's get into the first story, and this one starts at Phoenix Raceway during the NASCAR Cup Series race. Bubba Wallace and the number 23 Toyota from 23XI Racing were actually having a really good day. If you watched the race, you saw that Wallace was running competitively and putting together a solid performance. He ended up finishing 6th, which is a genuinely strong result when you consider how deep and talented the Cup Series field is right now. A top 10 finish, especially a 6th place finish, is nothing to be ashamed of. For most drivers and most teams, that is exactly the kind of day you want. But here is where things get interesting, and honestly a little painful if you're a Bubba Wallace fan. His result could have been even better. He had a real shot at finishing higher up in the running order, but one very small thing on pit road took that chance away from him. Bubba Wallace was penalized during the race for speeding on pit road. Now, if you follow NASCAR regularly, you know that pit road speeding penalties are not all that unusual. They happen in nearly every race. Drivers are constantly pushing right up to the edge of the speed limit because every fraction of a second you save on pit road can mean everything when it comes to track position. Being a few tenths of a second quicker in and out of the pits can move you up several spots on the restart. And in a sport where positions are won and lost by such tiny margins, teams are always walking that fine line. So a pit road penalty by itself is not a shocking thing, but what made this one stand out, what made fans stop and shake their heads, was the actual margin by which Wallace was speeding. He was over the pit road speed limit by just 0.08 miles per hour. Not 8 miles per hour, not even 1 mile per hour, 0.08 miles per hour. That is an almost unimaginably small difference. If you are driving down a street and your speedometer moves the tiniest possible amount, that is basically what we are talking about here. It's the kind of number that makes you wonder how the timing equipment even picks it up. But NASCAR's rules on pit road are very clear and very strict. There is no grace margin built in. There is no close enough in the rule book. If you are over the speed limit by any amount, even something as small as 0.08 miles per hour, you are getting a penalty. That's just how it works. And honestly, from a fairness standpoint, that consistency makes sense. If NASCAR started letting some drivers slide by at 0.1 over while penalizing others at 0.5 over, things would get complicated very quickly. So the rule is the rule, and Wallace paid the price for it. He was sent to the back of the field, which obviously hurt his track position and made the rest of the race more difficult than it needed to be. When you think about what he was fighting for that day, it is genuinely hard not to feel for him a little. He still managed to recover and finish 6th, which says a lot about his driving and his team's ability to fight back. But the question of what could have been is one that is going to linger. And Wallace was not the only big name dealing with pit road issues that day at Phoenix. Two-time Cup Series champion Kyle Busch and multiple race winner Kyle Larson also picked up speeding penalties on pit road during the same race. That tells you something important about how difficult pit road speed control was at Phoenix that weekend. When you have experienced veterans like Busch and Larson also getting caught, it shows that the conditions were challenging and the margins were exceptionally tight for everybody. It was not just one driver having a bad moment. Multiple top competitors were struggling with the same issue throughout the race. But as wild as those pit road speed penalties were, the single strangest and most memorable moment from the entire Phoenix race belonged to Dillon. Dillon received a penalty that was officially listed as removing equipment from the assigned pit area. That description sounds pretty technical and straightforward when you just read the words, but what actually happened was one of those moments that fans watching at home are not going to forget for a long time. The number 10 car left the pit box and drove away from the pits with the fuel can still physically attached to the car. And it was not like the car went a few feet before someone noticed. Dillon ended up completing an entire lap around Phoenix Raceway, a 1-mile oval, with that fuel can hanging off the car. If you were watching on television when it happened, it looked absolutely bizarre. The biggest relief that everyone could agree on was that nothing dangerous came from it, because a situation like that could have gone sideways in a hurry with other cars on track nearby. Fortunately, it stayed in the category of wild and unusual rather than anything more serious. When all the chaos settled down, Ryan Blaney came out on top and took the victory home for Team Penske. It was a solid win, and Blaney drove well to hold things together in a race that had plenty of drama. But when people talk about that Phoenix race in the weeks and months ahead, one of the moments that will keep coming up in conversation is that .08 mile-per-hour penalty on Bubba Wallace. It is exactly the kind of detail that shows how precise and unforgiving NASCAR really is at the highest level. You can do almost everything right and still have a single number that small change your entire race day. Now the second story, and this one shifts things away from the track and into real life, which sometimes has a way of showing up right in the middle of a racing season whether teams are ready for it or not. Bubba Wallace might actually miss a NASCAR Cup Series race this month, and the reason has absolutely nothing to do with anything that happened at Phoenix or anything related to penalties or competition. It is about family. Bubba Wallace and his wife Amanda are expecting their second child very soon, and the due date is coming up quickly. Earlier this season, Bubba Wallace was open and honest about something that has clearly stayed with him. When his first son, Brexton, was born, Wallace was not there because of his racing commitments. He missed the birth of his first child because he was focused on the job, and he has made it clear that he does not want that to happen again. When the time comes for this second child to arrive, he wants to be there. He wants to be present for his family, and that is a feeling that pretty much every person can understand, regardless of whether you follow NASCAR or not. From a human standpoint, there is nothing complicated about it at all. Of course he should be there. Of course being present for the birth of your child is more important than a race. But from a pure racing and competition standpoint, this creates a real logistical challenge for 23XI racing because pregnancies do not follow a schedule. A baby can arrive earlier than expected, later than expected, or right in the middle of a race weekend when everything is already in motion. The team has to be ready for any scenario, and Bubba Wallace's spotter Freddie Kraft spoke about this openly on the Door Bumper Clear podcast, explaining that the team already has 3 different backup plans in place, depending on how the situation unfolds. The first and most likely option if there is advance notice, meaning if the team knows ahead of time that Wallace will not be at the race, is Corey Heim. Heim is considered Plan A, and he is a talented driver who would be capable of stepping into the car and doing a solid job. However, there is a catch. Corey Heim and Bubba Wallace are built differently, which means the cockpit setup in the number 23 Toyota would need to be adjusted significantly before Heim could comfortably and safely drive the car. That kind of preparation takes time, roughly a full day of work at minimum to get everything set up properly. So Heim works as the replacement option when the team has enough lead time to make those changes. The scenario that gets more complicated is if things happen suddenly. If Amanda goes into labor with only a few hours to go before the race, or even during the race weekend itself, Wallace might have to leave immediately without any time for the team to prepare. In that situation, the team would go to a different driver, someone who fits the car well enough to jump in without requiring major setup changes. The team is prepared for that possibility too, which shows just how seriously 23XI Racing is taking this situation and how much thought has gone into the different ways things could play out. The timing of all this makes the situation even more specific and easier to watch for. Amanda's due date falls around the same time as the NASCAR Cup Series race at Darlington Raceway, which is scheduled for March 22nd. That makes Darlington the race that everyone is going to be paying attention to, not just for the racing itself, but also to see whether Wallace is behind the wheel of the number 23 car when the green flag drops. The natural question that comes up whenever a driver potentially misses a race is what happens to their championship eligibility. Under normal NASCAR Cup Series rules, drivers are expected to compete in every race to stay eligible for the playoffs and the championship. Missing a race can have real consequences for a driver's season, but NASCAR does have a waiver process that allows for exceptions under specific circumstances, and the birth of a child is exactly the kind of situation where a waiver is likely to be granted. There's already a recent example that points in that direction. Earlier in 2025, Denny Hamlin missed the Cup Series race in Mexico City, and NASCAR granted him a waiver that kept him eligible for the championship despite missing that event. That precedent matters a lot when thinking about how NASCAR would handle a similar situation involving Wallace. The logic is straightforward. If a driver misses a race because of a genuine family circumstance, like the birth of a child, it would be very difficult for NASCAR to deny a waiver when they already set that precedent with Hamlin. Most people following the sport expect that if Wallace misses Darlington for this reason, a waiver will be granted and his championship eligibility will remain intact. And honestly, that feels like the right call. NASCAR is a business and a competition, but it is also made up of human beings, and sometimes life simply has to come first. When you take a step back and look at both of these stories together, they actually paint a pretty complete picture of what NASCAR is really like at this level. On one hand, you have a race decided in part by a margin of 0.08 miles per hour, a number so small it almost feels impossible, and yet it had a real impact on the outcome of someone's race day. On the other hand, you have that same driver potentially stepping away from the car entirely because his family needs him, and a whole team scrambling to prepare for every possible version of how that might unfold. Tiny margins, huge moments, real life happening right in the middle of all of it. That is NASCAR in a nutshell. Do you think the pit road penalty on Bubba Wallace at Phoenix was too harsh, or do you believe that rules are rules and the speed limit means the speed limit no matter how small the margin is? And if Wallace does end up missing the Darlington race, do you think Corey Heim is the right person to step into the number 23 Toyota? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because NASCAR fans always have strong opinions about situations exactly like these, and that conversation is worth having. If you enjoyed this kind of honest NASCAR discussion, hit the like button and subscribe to NASCAR Nation Report. This channel is brand new, and we are working toward 1,000 subscribers. The whole idea is simple: a place where real NASCAR fans can talk about this sport honestly every single week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.